Today, Open Source Security is talking to Marc Boorshtein, the CTO of Tremolo Security. Marc is here to tell us all about authentication. He's the smartest person I know when it comes to kind of just all of the authentication universe. So, Marc, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get cracking.
Thanks, Josh. So, CTO, Tremolo Security. I have been doing authentication since 2002, 2003, I think. I got into LDAP in 2002 when I was wrapping up my college degree. So I've been in this for a long time. I've been open source since I discovered Linux in 1999. So so I've been working with more classic IAM, as you might call, if any of your listeners remember back to the Obelix or SiteMinder days, and Agent, which thankfully, blessedly, we've seemed to gotten away from, all the way till today of OpenID Connect and SAML and all the hundreds of specs out there that you need to go through.
Okay, so let's talk about some of that. So we're going to pretend the whole password and username, we'll ignore that, right? Well, in theory, that's easy enough, right? I know it's not. I know Mark's looking at me funny because just passwords is surprisingly difficult when you deal with that universe. But we're not going to talk about that today. I really want to talk about kind of the SAML and OpenID. What is it? Zero trust networking, I guess, is the hip, cool term these days. So let's start there. So I think regardless of industry, regardless of whether like open source, closed source, anything at all, the whole like single sign-on and zero trust ideas seem to be becoming more pervasive. So like, what does that mean? What is single sign-on? Just explain that to us simply, let's say.
So single sign-on tends to be in the context of web applications for the most part. It's not exclusively for web applications. Those of us who grew up in the Windows world of, I sign into my Windows account and then everything just magically works. That's Kerberos. That's SSO. Right? It's SSO based on standard, but it's SSO. Whereas with the web application world, you don't typically have that level of homogeneousness, right? Like you can do that in the Microsoft world because it just all works, right? It's one environment. Microsoft did a really good job of making it so that you didn't need to know anything to make it work. It did securely for the most part, like, NT LM versus Kerberos and whatnot, but like the concepts were all correct. And even like seasoned Microsoft admins had no idea what the heck was going on under the covers. But as we've moved out of the realm of, these homogeneous environments and into these large heterogeneous environments, standards got developed. So back in the day, and when I mean back in the day, I'm talking early 2000s, probably up until about 2012, maybe 2015, the standard was because you didn't have really well accepted standards at the application layer, you would have an agent-based SSO system. So you would have something like a SiteMinder, an Obelix, or a ForgeRock, where there would be a server, and you would install an agent into your web server. And that agent would talk this proprietary language and you'd get a cookie. And this was all because, at least in theory, you can't pass cookies between domains, right? Like, that went out the window with marketing, but at least the way the spec was written, you're not supposed to pass cookies between domains. And so SAML came out and, oh God, SAML was originally IDFF because, short aside, I had to write a senior thesis when I was in college, and I wrote my thesis on cross-domain SSO and trust consumer level SSO. And I did it based on IDFF, which was the predecessor to SAML. And my conclusion was that the technology is not the hard part. You just can't trust anybody. And you have to put trust frameworks in place, and you have to, and my CS professor was like, you wrote 30 pages and that was your fucking conclusion? Really? I was like, the tech's there, it works. And the tech is there. I mean, we've been doing PKI now for how many decades? And it's all based on PKI. So that was the original part of SSO. Today, when people talk about SSO, what they typically talk about is either OpenID Connect, usually it's OpenID Connect, sometimes it's SAML. And the primary difference between, there's a operational difference between SAML and OIDC, and there's literal difference. The literal difference between OpenID Connect and SAML, and I have a lot of friends that are going to curse my name and tell me that I am a terrible human being for saying this, but really the only difference between the two is one is XML and one's JSON. Like you can do almost the exact same thing with either. It's just XML sucks. It's terrible to manage. It's terrible to deal with.
Yes.
It's so easy to build insecure parsing. And like I've been doing XML for decades and it's terrible. It sucks. Whereas JSON is easier to process on the client side. And so that was really where OpenID Connect got big. So that's the literal difference from a practical standpoint, from a technical standpoint. The implementation of SAML is usually done using what's called the post artifact, where when you go to a website, so I go to, the classic example is I want to log into my benefits website, right? I go to my benefits website, I get redirected to what's called an identity provider. The identity provider authenticates me. Then what gets generated is a little web page with some JavaScript in it that will then do an HTTP post from the identity provider of the SAML assertion down to your benefits provider. And so if you draw it on a whiteboard, all the transactions go through your browser. The benefits provider never talks to your corporate identity provider. And once upon a time, when networks were all super segmented, so much easier to implement because I didn't need to get firewall. Today, you have much flatter networks. One, you have flatter networks. Two, and this is especially true since COVID, is people don't have to maintain their own internal identity providers the way they used to. You're talking usually Entra, Okta, one of the big ones, right? And so you're already going out to the internet to do that anyways. So the crosstalk isn't as big of a deal anymore. That's the first thing. The second thing is with OpenID Connect, what's different is I go to my benefits website, I get redirected back to my identity provider. So that's the same thing. But when I get redirected back to the benefit site, what's called the relying party, I just get a token. Like I don't get the actual identity. So then the relying party has to run a query up to the identity provider and say, hey, I got this token. It doesn't mean anything to me. Give me something meaningful. And that's when you get an ID token and an access token. You can do that with SAML. It's just not popular. Like people just didn't do it because it was a pain in the butt to do.
I didn't know you could do that with SAML. I thought SAML interesting
Yeah.
because I feel like from my experience, SAML is often more, we'll say the corporate identity providers versus when you're dealing with OpenID Connect. I feel like that's more I'm using Google or Okta or GitHub or the sign in with something button that you see all over the web now.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's why I'm saying like there's a literal difference and there's a de facto difference, an operational difference. Operational, literally you can do almost the exact same thing with both. Now, there are things that are a little bit different between OpenID Connect and SAML because SAML is meant to be kind of like a one-time thing. You do the authentication, you're done. Whereas OpenID Connect, the idea is you can phone home and be like, hey, is this person still signed in? Should I log them out? Have they been, so there's a little more built into OpenID Connect because I think to do OpenID Connect, it's like 200 RFCs, I think was the last count. And that was maybe 2 years ago. It's big. And so like you had mentioned earlier in the show, we're not going to talk about storing username. Please, for the love of God, never, ever write your own username and passwords. Don't even write your own. I get into this argument with people all the time. Yes, OpenID Connect is easy. Also so easy to screw up. Perfect example. In the TLS world, null keys, right?
Yes.
Zero, null keys, no encryption. You can do that with OIDC, right? And if you just trust the algorithm to be none, you just, you just said, okay, I'll accept any JWT you create. Now, JWT, JSON Web Token. So it's JSON that is digitally signed. But if you're relying on that for security, most libraries, if you try to supply a tag that says none, it'll error out. Like you have to explicitly say, yes, I know this is a terrible idea, but I'm going to allow it. So please, 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 please never, ever, ever write your own authentication code. Always use a library.
Yes, that is without question, the de facto accepted device in the authentication world. This is true of crypto. It's true of a lot of things. Like don't roll your own crypto either. But okay,
Don't do it yourself.
So let's talk about this then. There are libraries that let us implement. Let's focus on OpenID Connect, because I do think, yes, SAML and OpenID Connect are similar, but I think at this point, OpenID Connect is the clear winner in the universe, which is great. And so I am a project. I am a commercial entity. I'm whatever. I want to support authenticating with OpenID Connect. And let's say log in with Google, log in with GitHub, something like that. What does getting that to work look like? Because it's not just include SSO, .py, and now I'm done, everybody. We have login with whatever, but there's some work we have to do, right? To make this all there are moving parts. We have to go to Google, we have to go to GitHub, we have to go to wherever, and there's some things that have to happen. So walk us through what something like that kind of looks like.
So if you're writing an application, it depends, right? So let's say you're writing kind of your classic server side. I do most of the rendering on the server. Maybe it's running inside of a Java application container or C# or a Python or whatever, right? First, look at your web server, whatever your container is, and see if that container provides it for you. So then you have to do as little as possible, right? So like in the Java world, a lot of times it's Spring as an example. But, if you're using Tomcat or you're using, Wildfly or IBM, whichever Java one you're using, in the C# world, it's got its own embedded thing. Whatever you're writing your thing in on the server side, see if that has it. Because that's going to be your best maintained, your most tested, that's got the most eyeballs on it area. So that's often referred to as like container managed, not containers like Docker or Kubernetes, just your web, right? And then there are places like PHP that make me weep, where, there is no session management. There is no, anything, right? That's when you go to a library, go to a tested library that is built in where they're doing it. Like, don't write it yourself. Am I a hypocrite because I wrote it myself? Yes. But I've got 30 years of experience where all I do is authentication. So, and plus, when I publish something, I've got 1,000 negative tests that are saying, okay, well, what happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? And I will tell you, Open Unison, our product, has had security issues in the past where we've missed stuff and we've had to go back and fix it because this shit's really hard to do. So don't ever write it yourself. Start at the container, move your way down. If you're in more of like a corporate environment, see if they provide something, because a lot of times, so give you an example, a lot of reverse proxy solutions have built-in capabilities around SSO so that you don't have to do it. Now, then it gets into the silos of the enterprise of, well, do I really want to? Yes, F5, as an example, will do OpenID Connect. No, your F5 team probably won't let you do it because they don't want to have to deal with it. So there's that. But from a technology standpoint, do it as far away from your application as possible, so you have as little work to do. Then you look at something like a single page application where you're talking, most modern applications, stuff built in React. That's where you want to really make sure you're using a library, because again, it ain't rocket science, but there are libraries where they're just keeping the tokens refreshed. Because here's the thing, the key to security when it comes to OpenID Connect is the length, the session longevity of the token, right? It's a bearer token. So pick your favorite sports ball event from back in the day when you used to get paper tickets and you used to just say, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I bought my ticket from the ticket office, and if somebody grabbed the ticket and ran up to the turnstile, you were screwed, right? Like that was the only ticket you had. That's what bearer token, right? So if your bearer token gets leaked, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, who among us hasn't accidentally checked the token into GitHub? That's one of my favorite memes. I've got that one saved, right? So it's a thing, like that happens all the time. And, software leaks it. You accidentally log it. Like there's 12 million different ways to leak a token. And so the super important part is that the token is short-lived. You want a library that keeps it up to date. So if you're writing a single page application, use one of the libraries that is more common for OpenID Connect. Don't do it yourself.
Right. Okay. I use a library. I've got that set up. But now if I wanted to support, let's say, login with GitHub, I have to register my application with GitHub, right, to support this?
So GitHub's a little bit of a special snowflake because they didn't actually implement OpenID Connect.
All right, let's pick on someone who did that. Let's say Google.
But this is kind of an important point, though, because this is where you get into identity proxies. Okay. So the idea is that you as the application developer, we used to call this the NASCAR login page where, you have, NASCAR, they have all the patches for all the advertisers. Yeah. Same thing on thankfully people aren't doing this with Facebook anymore, but like, you go to the chat GPT, it's like, Google, Azure, or Microsoft, whatever they call it, GitHub, GitLab, there's like 4 or 5 of them, right? That's called, once upon a time, we used to call that the NASCAR login page. As an application writer, don't do that. It should not be your problem. Like if I'm writing an application, do not focus on anything but OpenID Connect. If somebody needs to allow authentication to multiple providers, you say, no, you go use an identity proxy like OpenUnison or Dex or Keycloak, right? Like, there are a bunch of open source ones out there, but the point is that if you as the application developer start trying to develop for all these different methods, you're going to get yourself in trouble because your focus is on this cool app thing, right? It's not on the management of these token libraries. And so you're just piling on additional potential scenarios where you're going to get yourself in trouble. There's an additional use case of no authentication. So if you're building a consumer level application, maybe you don't want people to authenticate. Maybe you do. Like it could be mixed. So I'll give you an example. I maintain, or my company maintains an identity service here in Northern Virginia for government to residents. And they've been really clear, like if somebody wants to get an account because they don't want to have to re-enter information every time, mazel tov. But they need to also be able to do it without logging in too. And so if you keep piling that on into your app, you're going to create a security log. Whereas if you say, I'm going to offset that to an identity provider or an identity proxy, even if I'm not going to allow my own username and password, you're going to make your life so much easier.
Okay, we have exited the space where I know what's going on. So this is completely new to me. So I'm not pretending to not have a clue what just happened. I literally don't. So, okay. So you're telling me instead of relying on like log into Google, log into Facebook, log into GitHub, log into whatever, that you ideally want to kind of move that up a level where you have, for example, I would say I need to log into my service. I'm going to go to some other identity source that could have login to Google or login to Facebook or login to whatever. That's not my problem because I only need the authentication information from that. Is identity provider the correct word in this context or identity proxy? I don't know what to call that.
So it's very vendor specific. I tend to call them identity proxies because you don't often actually see anything from them. They're just a jumping point. They might ask you how you want to log in, but that's about it. So projects that work in this way, OpenUnison, our own open source project, shameless plug. Dex, which if you're outside of the Kubernetes world, you might not have heard of. It's a small, lightweight identity SSO system. Keycloak, which is no one's ever called small or lightweight. Keycloak, guys, I love you. I love you. No, seriously, I say it with love. But, I mean, there are different tools and then like the online tools will do it too, like Okta and Azure AD or Entra ID now. And Auth will also serve this role for you as well. So you as the application developer, and I know that there's this like instinct, I want to own everything. Like I want to be responsible for everything because people are going to come bitch at me if it's broken, but you don't want to own this, right? Because, we talked a couple weeks ago when I was on your other podcast. I think I said this, login is guilty until proven innocent, right?
Yes.
Yeah. If you're going to own it, then you're going to own it, right? Whereas if you can offload that, even if it's to a different system that you have to own, yes, you're asking your users to add something else, but in the year of our Lord 2024, or no, we're 2025, excuse me. In the year of
Yes.
our Lord 2025, you know, like saying you need to have a Google OIDC, an OIDC provider is like saying you need to have a web server, right? Like you need to have something to run this as a web server. It's basic infrastructure at this point.
Okay, so here's the other thing that's in my brain now all of a sudden is so when I log into certain sites, and I can't even think of a good example right now. Cloudflare. I'll use Cloudflare as an example. I go to Cloudflare. I have the ability to log in with like Google or whatever, and I also have the ability to set a username and password. So in the scenario you're explaining, if I'm using some other tool, I can then support username and password or log in with some other service. Is that correct?
Preferably MFA, but yes, you can then support a
Yeah.
local
Yes.
credential. Because again, then we get back to that original conversation. Why shouldn't you store passwords? Because they're really easy to lose and crack, and you want to store them properly and all that good stuff, right? And it's a lot harder to do. Because I'm a big pass fan, right? I talk about passkeys all the time, and if you implement a passkey, but your passkey is set based on a token sent to your email, that's the weakest link, right? So even though individual authentications are really super strong because they're passkeys and you're not phishable, if your email password is password, right? So
Right.
I still try to offload that as much as possible. But again, you then can have a local credential because you are always going to have people who are like, no, I want local credentials. I don't want Google to know every time I sign in. I mean, I hate to break it to you, they know anyway. So, but or I don't want, Google to know, or I use Proton Mail and nobody reads my stuff. And it's like, well, sorry, they are reading it. But, you know, I, there are people who don't want to use centralized, if you're talking about a consumer facing that don't want to use centralized. And so, but again, even then, things like passkeys become really important because as an example, you can log in, you can have your cake and eat it too in that scenario where you register your pass. I was actually just going through this yesterday. It looks like Google and Microsoft are finally synchronizing passkeys. Well, let's say you're in the Apple universe. You register a passkey on your laptop, and then you go to your iPhone. Your passkey goes with you. Apple doesn't know that you authenticated to a website. So that's kind of the best of both worlds. But again, you as the app developer shouldn't know what the fuck a passkey is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let the identity system handle that.
Right. Right. And so you mentioned about, email as the lowest common denominator. We'll say, so the concern I actually have, and I do this with some of my, we'll say lowest level services, which is things like Cloudflare and my DNS provider for my own stuff. I have this like terror that if I lose access to, let's say, Google for some reason, be it like DNS breaks or my domain has problems or a website is broken, I can't log into anything now, right? Like that's the mortal fear I have is in order to fix the problem I have, if I have to log into the place the problem is, I now have an unfixable chicken and egg issue.
And that is yes, because until, we all get the mark of the beast or whatever, and, everything, Elon gets his way and we all get everything embedded and, even that'll break, I mean, yes. I mean, that is look at the federal government, US federal government uses PIV cards, right? Smart cards. And what happens if you forget to bring your smart card in? You just not work? You just sit in the parking lot, bored for 8 hours? No. You go into the security office, say, I forgot it. Okay, we're gonna, log in with the password.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, but that's right. That's always the biggest problem, right? I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people who are like, oh, just passkey everything, right? Put a passkey on. Put a passkey on GitHub. Cool. What's your backup plan? What happens when the passkey goes through the wash? Right? Like, these are things that happen. Have more passkeys, and like, there's logic to that, but like, there is this kind of insurmountable chicken and egg problem that you're just never going to fix, right? Like, until we get to the point where like every U.S. citizen or every world citizen has an electronic ID that like, and even that's fallible. I mean, so I think the you're never going to get to the point of perfect security, right? You're gonna get to the point of somebody really wants it, they're gonna get it. But,
Yeah.
somebody who's just scrolling to see what they can pick up.
Yes. All right. We'll have to bring you back at some point to talk about passkeys and some of this because I feel like we started on SSO and we veered off into the philosophical questions of identity, which is a really hard problem though. Like it is one of those things you could sit in a pub for many evenings and many, many pints and probably end up exactly where we are today. So
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I will say I have tried to get out of the identity world and, like, because I've just gotten bored or, like, it's just time for me for a new challenge. And I ain't gonna lie, the money's just too good. Like, every time I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna go do" I'm gonna focus on DevOps, or I'm gonna focus on, whatever. When I compare once upon a time when I was a contractor, when I would compare the difference in contracts, I couldn't walk away from that money. I mean, I will tell you the last few contracts I was on where I was on DevOps team, and this is to folks who, the economy is rough, people are looking for work, you're looking for skills. I will say that when almost every team that I was on of contractors, I was almost always the highest paid contractor. Even more than like the senior folks who designed everything and the senior architects and whatever. I was always the most expensive contractor because these are very difficult skills. They're very specialized. They're always in high demand.
yeah, right. Identity isn't going away. Exactly. It's like healthcare, right?
Well,
All right, before we get ourselves in trouble, Mark, I think it's time to go.
exactly.
This has
We
been
in
awesome.
trouble?
I want to thank you so much, man. I've learned a ton. I didn't think I'd learn near as much as I did in this. So thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me. And you know where to find me. I'm always happy to spout off on something else.
Oh yes, you'll definitely be back. All right. Thanks everyone.